Oh, hello. It looks like you're muted if you're trying to say something. Hello.
Lillian,
Hi, Angie.
I'm on my phone driving right now, but I'll be on my computer in a little bit. Sorry
Okay,
about that.
that's all right. It's just the three of us, so I guess we'll get started. My name is Lillian Blair. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the instructor for this course. I'm a producer and engineer in the Seattle area, and I've been teaching at Vera for a couple years, including an in person studio recording workshop that this mixing course sort of grew out of as we were forced to go online with everything. I've worked with several established local artists like Naked Giants, Jason McHugh, and Left at London, as well as a lot of other up and comers in the past several years that I've been doing this. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to sort of explore music and to help bring the artist's creative vision to a reality. As engineers, we're really here to serve that vision. And so uh, it's important for every step of the process to um, be thinking not only what we think sounds cool, but what the artists are going to think sounds cool as well. When we mix these days in particular, we tend to do so alone in our bedrooms. So when I'm like putting together a mix, like I'm constantly asking myself, like, what is the artist going to like this? Does this fit the music? Um, is this going to be enjoyable to the fans? Because ultimately, it's for them that everything is being created. Um, so a little bit about the course. We're going to meet for 3 Sundays for 3 hours a day for 9 total hours of instruction. Each day we will be doing a new mix. I hope you've had the chance to download the multi tracks for today. We are going to be doing a song that was recorded in one of my in person studio workshops. It's called Pirate Radio Queen by Naked Giants. Nice, fun, straightforward rock and roll song. So hopefully you'll enjoy working on it as much as I have. It'll give us a chance to really explore like the core of what like a big studio recording um, session is like when it comes to mixing. Um, and hopefully will give you ample opportunity to practice a lot of skills that can translate to the work that you're doing. The big difference between studio recorded and home recorded is in the number of microphones that you can set up. So you'll see I put, I think, 16 microphones up on the drums, through 2 mics on the bass and the guitar, and then a DI for each. And we'll explain what the general like philosophy behind each of those mics are as we get to it. But as I said, like the concepts and skills that we develop doing this are will translate over. So if you only have like one snare microphone, the concept for mixing the snare microphone is going to be the same when it comes to like EQ and compression, as opposed, even if you don't have that under microphone. Overheads are, of course, the same because they're still two microphones and they're really the core of the kit. And of course, like with amp modeling software, you can, plug your instrument directly into your interface and get whatever sound that you are after. So that's going to be this week. For next week, we are either going to do another rock song or an electronic song. I haven't decided yet. I think I'll leave that up to you guys. And then for week 3, we are going to do something that one of my artists recorded in his house with one microphone. So we'll be able to really explore that kind of stripped down home recording. The class is going to be comprised of me mixing and explaining what I'm doing, and then giving you all a chance to explore yourselves and mix along. So I hope that is something that you're all excited to do. There's plenty of time for your own experimentation as well as for questions. So please feel free to ask questions as you have them and to actively engage with the class. It's a small class size, me plus the two of you. So hopefully we'll all feel comfortable just communicating with each other. So with that said, I am going to go and hop over to Pro Tools and we are going to start. Pro Tools. Okay. So here's my Pro Tools session, and as you can see, I already have some tracks going. I'm actually running my audio through Pro Tools to do some fun stuff with it. Up here, I've got a gate so that the microphone is only active when I'm speaking. You can see that it's over the threshold here, and as soon as it drops down, the mic signal cuts out. I have a compressor to even out the sound of my voice and bring it all up. A limiter to raise the volume because my microphone is kind of quiet. And the coolest thing, I have it being sent to this bus right here, which is going to a compressor on the stereo out. So my voice will actually duck the music once it gets going, so I can talk over music as I'm playing. And then both my voice and the stereo out gets sent out separate outputs, so we're actually listening to different feeds for the audio. That's just a quick example of the complex ways you can get audio tracks to interact with each other. So I'm going to hop over to the edit window. Got there by pushing Control equals on a PC or Command equals on a Mac. And now I'm going to bring in my audio. I'm going to come up here to File, click Import Audio, and then since this is the same session that I used last time, the audio is already in the Audio Files folder. I'm going to select all of them and click Add Files. So now it gives me the option to select new track or clip list. I'm going to select new track. And now you can see that we have a whole bunch of tracks with audio on them for us to play around with. So the first thing I'm going to do is organize the tracks because right now they're alphabetical, so they're not like grouped necessarily by instrument, and they're also all the same color, so it's really difficult visually to be able to tell what each one is. So we deal with that by adjusting the order of our tracks and adjusting the color of them. I'm going to start with the kick microphones, bring those all the way over to the left. Next, I'm going to grab the snare microphones, and you can see that top and bottom are swapped, so I can move those around, bring those over there. Next, I'm going to grab the overheads, which I have as mono tracks listed as overhead hat and overhead ride. Bring those there. Next, I'm going to grab the hat and the ride track because I've got microphones on those cymbals. Next, we're going to grab the racks. I've got two microphones on them, the rack top and the rack bottom. Then we're going to have our floor top and floor bottom. I have two room microphones, a room hat and a room ride. And those are about 12 feet back from the kit to add some more ambience in the space. And then finally, I have this FOK mic, which is a front of kit mic. It's actually more like an overhead because it was measured against the snare, just like I measured the two overheads. So I'm going to put it over here with the overheads, and it creates this really fun additional sonic character that you get by just placing the microphone there. Now that we have all of our drum microphones in order, I'm going to select them and double click this color bar down here where I can assign it a color, and I'm going to go red because that's what I always do. It's good to have some consistency with the way you organize your tracks and you color code them so you can easily see where everything is. The reason why the drums are in this particular order is because this is sort of the standard order for tracking drums. And so, when I'm in the studio, I know exactly which order everything's going to be in. When I'm mixing, I can easily find what I'm after when it comes to selecting mics and channels to work with. So next I'm going to go up and do the bass, and you can see the bass is kind of spread out over a couple tracks here. So we need to get those organized. I'm going to take the DI and the 2 amps, put them right here, bring this one down. Because these are little accents, I'm going to bring them a little farther down. Put the DI at the top of each of them. Make these guys that kind of blue. And these guys that kind of blue. So we can see, we can easily differentiate between them. Guitars are going to be the same. I have 2 microphones and a DI on the guitars. And so I'm going to arrange them, color code them, and then finally we have the same situation with the vocals. 4 vocal tracks, they're doubled. I'm going to leave them in that order, color code them, and final thing before we're ready to listen, I'm going to select every single track. Then I'm going to hold Alt-Shift from here to the output and send it to the sub bus. So what I've done is I've sent all of the audio tracks to this auxiliary track, which is going to be sent out both of the outputs, output 3, 4, which is what you're listening to, and output 1, 2, which is what I'm listening to. And now that everything's set up, I'm going to press play, and we're going to hear how ridiculous it sounds with no levels, no panning. Here's what the song sounds like.
Of the radio dial. She's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while. She knows that she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand it, but you know it. Wait and stare, but I know that she sings from the way to the crowd.
Can everyone hear that okay? If there are any like problems with the audio quality or like skips and stutters, let me know. I can fix it. I just can't tell when it's happening. So that really doesn't sound like what we want it to sound like. That's because we haven't done any leveling, we haven't done any panning, and we haven't done any actual mixing. So that is now the first thing we're going to do, which is let's get some panning done, let's get some levels done to see how close we can get without touching any of our tricks. I'm going to start again, and here we go. So the first thing I'm going to do is pan out with the guitars. The guitars are double tracked, which is really sort of standard for audio production when you have the guitars. The point of that is so that you can pan them out and create this nice, huge, wide sound. So, to pan them out, like this. And you can hear already the song opens up. It doesn't sound as weird as it did before, and it's already starting to sound pretty cool. The next thing I'm going to do, because I don't actually want the sound of the DIs in the guitar, at least not yet, is I'm going to pull those down. Next, I'm going to start grouping the tracks together. Control or Command G, and follows guitar 1, and Control or Command G is guitar 2. So what grouping does is it allows you to move the faders together. So I can bring this down, bring it back up, I can even pan these together. But this will allow me to get some decent levels going as I balance everything out. Go over here to the vocals. They're pretty constant right now. So, I restarted the song because the song's really short. And I have the vocals pretty decently set against the guitars. I pulled down the level of the double a little bit because that's sort of what I kind of feel is giving us like a better balance.
But you know that she's there and I know it. Takes a minute to understand it, but you know it.
It still gives us like the effect of the double, but it's also gives us more focus just having the one vocalist larger. So now we move on to the bass. And after quickly auditioning the tones of the microphones, I'm just going to give a quick balance just to have a working tone to deal with. We'll dive more into it once we get to working on the bass. I'm going to do the same with the bass accents. And then I'm going to come over here to the drums. The drums, I'm going to pull down everything except for the 3 overhead microphones. I'm going to pan out the 2 overheads.
inside of me. I'm sick.
Probably keeping it about 80%. I don't like hard panning my overheads
Reject.
because it can sound a little like weird, like a little too wide. But having them around 80, I've found makes them sound more natural.
I know she's the queen of the radio dial. She's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while.
I'm pulling my kick
You
drum.
know that she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand it, but you know it.
Pulling the
And I
snare.
know that she sleeps on the way to the cab.
Bring up the hat and pan it out. Bring up the ride and pan it out. Let's get the rooms up. You can hear that nice ambience is coming in. And the rooms, I do like having hard pan, so that actually gives us this sort of triangular progression as the sound
I know that she sleeps on the way to the
propagates through the different microphones. The snare microphone is mono at the center, then the overheads are spaced out on the drums as well as spaced out in our mix, and finally the rooms are even further spaced in reality, and so we reflect that in our pan. Finally, for this first phase, I'm going to go and I'm going to find points where we have our toms and get those tom signals in. That's pretty good. And now let's get the floor. And now I'm going to group together the drums just like I did the other instruments, so we can have some individualized control over them, and I'm going to get a balance over everything.
I know she's the queen of the radio dial. She's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while. But you know that she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand it, but you know it when it's there. But I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab. But she's just
So you can hear just after like adjusting levels and panning things out to give them a bit of space, we already have a much more open mix, a much more solid one, definitely a lot closer to releasable. It doesn't have like the pop that we're going to be going after, but it does have a lot more balance to it, and we accomplish that just by adjusting the levels. So as you're going through and mixing, remember that the most powerful tool you have is your faders. So I will give you all a couple minutes to play around with your own mixes, get things sort of where you want them, and let me know when you're ready to continue. And chat is fine if you don't have a microphone hooked up. Excellent. Okay. So now that we have our basics done, it's time to start diving in. And to do that, I'm going to start over here with drums. Drums are going to take the most time, so that's why I want to start focusing on them. And we're going to start with our 3 overheads. I'm going to solo them, and so we can take a listen, and here is what the individual microphones are doing. Here are the spaced pair that we set up. Adjust the levels a little bit. And here is the frontal kick mic. You can hear a really solid snare tone. Bring it all together. And that sounds pretty cool. But before we go forward, we need to do what we should be obsessively doing, especially with drums, which is checking for phase. So phase is the relation between the up and down, the peaks and the valleys of the waveform. So you can see here with our overheads, you see this little bit of a peak. That's when the snare hits. It drops down a little bit, goes up, drops down, goes up, drops down. And so what we need to do is make sure that the ups and the downs happen at the same time. If not, then the signal will cancel each other out, because this is really just a representation of voltage. You know, you try and add a negative voltage to a positive voltage, it's going to cancel itself out, and this signal is not going to sound particularly good. There is also a small problem with this right here. You can see that even though we measured against the center of the snare, this ride overhead is slightly off. So the first thing I'm going to do, come up here to sample view. When does it start? Find the 0 point before that initial stick hit. Drag it over to the 0 point on the other one, and then load up a plugin in Pro Tools, which is called Time Adjuster. What Time Adjuster does is it allows you to add delay to the signal based on a certain number of samples. So we have it measured at 46. I'm going to put in 46. And now you won't see the waveform move, but it will play at a different time or it will play 46 samples later. So to hear the difference, I'm going to bring these back mono, because you tend to check your phase in mono. So now I'm going to flip the phase. The phase flip is this little 0 with a line in it. So with the phase flipped, you can hear that the snare drum really comes in. And with it, the phase not flipped, it is really, sounds really weak. And we can see that visually because this waveform starts by going up, this waveform starts by going down. So we're going to have those flipped. Now we're going to bring in the frontal kit again, and we can already tell that since we're flipping this one to match this one, we need to also flip the frontal kit microphone, because it too is out of phase. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to load up a different plugin. I'm going to load up the EQ3 one band, which is just a simple one band EQ with a nice handy phase flip button. And let's hear what the difference is that makes. So you can hear really strong snare sound coming out of that. While we're at it, let's go and take care of the snare, these snare microphones that we have right here. So you can see that the phase is lined up and we are roughly in phase, so we shouldn't have to worry about that. Let's bring in the top and test the phase against the overheads, and there shouldn't be much of a problem because the top is actually a sample. But you can hear that there's a definite difference, simply because even though it's a different drum, it's still the same frequencies. So I'm going to bring in the bottom and drag this down since we're not using it, and listen to what the bottom sounds like. I'm testing everything against the overheads because when everything is in phase based on the overheads, I know that everything is in phase. So again, I think it sounds better without the phase being flipped. Now bring them both in. Next up, we're going to do the kick, and since I haven't flipped the phase, I'm not going to bother bringing in a new plugin. Now we can zoom in on the kick and see already that these two are out of phase with each other. You can also guess what the phase relation is going to be based on looking at the waveform here. So it's likely that we're going to need to flip the phase on this kick out microphone. Let's see if we are right first by testing the kick in. Typically when something is in phase, it sounds lower. So we're going to go over to the kick out, test that. And yes, the kick out mic needs to have its phase flipped. Next up, we're going to go do the hat and the ride, and these I like to test against the snare, just because that is sort of like our main focus. So I think it sounds better that way. I'm going to do the same with the ride. You can hear, especially with a ride, it really goes away. I'm going to bring these back down to where I had them. Finally go and adjust the racks. And we can see that they are pretty close to being lined up. They are in phase. Now can we see up here with our overheads whether or not we think it's in phase? And I'm going to go with these both being out of phase. So I'm going to bring down a copy of this plugin just by holding Alt and dragging. Check the rack top. Yeah, so there's more ring with the phase flipped. And since I know that these are both in phase, I can just bring that down. And now finally we're going to go to the floor and do the same. The floors are sort of half off axis, so they're kind of good the way that they are. I'm going to look up here to the overheads, and I'm going to say that that is interesting. I can't tell visually, so now we're going to check with our ears. It definitely sounds lower with the phase flip, so I'm going to have that and then bring it back down for this one. And you can hear with the bottom mic being out of phase, the sound really goes away. Finally, we're going to come to the rooms, and I'm going to start by testing the rooms just against each other. I'm going to bring in a new plugin. And they sound like they're in phase. Because they're so far away from the kit and they're picking up a lot of reflections, it's not as the difference, like a fade in phase, is not going to be as like pronounced as if it were talking about two close microphones. Since I know that they're in phase, I'm going to just listen to one of them with the overheads. Flip that again. And I can't hear a difference because the time has been... the time is so great from when the snare hits the overhead to when the snare hits the rooms that it's really not making much of a difference. So I'm going to go and make some adjustments to our all the elements that I pan center to check the phase, and now let's listen to the drums. So there we have, you can hear just by like double checking the phase, we have a much stronger drum track to move forward with. Angie wants to know how to add a sample to the snare. That's not an option with stock Pro Tools. You have to get a third-party software like I've got one here, the one that I used, it's Steven Slate Trigger 2. The reason why I ended up using a snare sample is because the original file got corrupted. So what I ended up doing was creating a sample using the snare bottom microphone and then looking through the different snare samples available and finding one that sounded close enough to the sound of the snare that it would serve as a reasonable replacement. You can hear there are some snare sounds, so in order to do this, I just drag the snare down over there. Maybe drag the second one. Go here to be able to adjust the levels. And then when the snare hits, based on these settings that I have here, it's actually playing these drums instead of the snare sample that I have. Does that answer your question? So anyway, next up, now that we have a basic mix going, I want to listen individually to what we have from our microphones. I do want to make sure that I can. We'll do busing in a second. So I'm going to start with this kick-in microphone, and we're going to listen to the sound it gives us. So that microphone is placed pretty far into the kit and aimed at the batter head, and because it's inside the kit and there's no like fabric in there to dampen it, it's has some standing waves building up between the two drum heads, which is creating this sort of basketball-like sound. That's something that will EQ away. And to do that, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to load up this EQ 7-band equalizer. You can see we have 5 parametric bands, 2 of them can be shelves, and then we have a high pass and a low pass. So the first thing I want to do though is get rid of that that basketball effect. So I'm going to grab this mid-frequency band here, and I'm going to boost it up a lot so I can really hear what's going on. And then I'm going to do a sweep of the frequencies, listening to how it changes to find the frequency that I don't want, and then I will cut that out. So you can hear there's that ring there that's really going to be like the corridor basketball sound. So now I'm just going to cut to see how much I can remove. That's a lot better. I'm not exactly satisfied with it, so I'm going to go and grab this band and find the harmonic above this. Harmonics are always double. So if we go ahead and double 939, we're going to look at 1.878. Not even going to let me do that. 1.87 kilohertz. And it's going to be around here where we have our other harmonic. I'm going to boost it up. You can hear the basketball sound kind of comes back in. So now I'm going to go ahead and cut. And that sounds much nicer already. So without the EQ and with the EQ. It does sound a little dull, so now I'm going to boost up, find where I want to boost for the batter sound. That seems pretty good. And now I'm going to boost up the lows, just to really bring out the tone a little bit. That's a pretty solid kick sound. With the EQ and without. So now that we have a good EQ on the kick in, let's take a listen to the kick out. A lot punchier sounding to me. There is a lot of bleed from the other instruments because it is outside. And I don't really need a lot of high end out of this, so I'm going to go ahead and use this low pass filter and just bring down the frequency. What a low pass filter does is it rolls off the frequencies either above or below what is known as the corner frequency, which is right here. And we can change how steep it is with this knob. You can hear how it's much more aggressive. So what I'm going to do is just roll this out. I'm going to be pretty aggressive with it because I want to cut out as much of the bleed as I can. That's pretty good. Next, I'm going to see if there's a frequency in here that I want to boost. I haven't necessarily decided if I want to, so now it's just going to be a listen. Okay, so what I'm going to do is boost the harmonic of what I'm boosting on the kick in. These sort of like 100 hertz areas for kick drums add a lot of punch to it. But hopefully by having that brought in, it'll give us a nice balanced tone between the two microphones. So I went ahead and I flipped the phase around on it because we were losing some of the low end. EQ can impart some phase shift, so it's always good to be sort of obsessively checking phase as you go through. And because we did a phase flip there, I'm just going to go and check it against this front and kick mic. And I think I want the kick drums to be opposite phase of what my overheads are. So I'm going to come back here, unflip that, but flip this one. So now I'm going to bring in the overheads. There, we have a really solid kick sound. I'm going to make an adjustment here real quick. Okay, I was experiencing some stutteriness in the audio, so I went ahead and I adjusted the buffer size. That is has to do with how the computer talks to the interface, and it is once you start imparting more processing onto your mix, then you're going to run into issues with the interface not being able to keep up with the processing, so that's why I need to increase your buffer size. Now that we have our kick drum EQ'd, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to create an auxiliary track. So that is, you either come up here to track and select new, or you do Control Shift N on PC or Command Shift N on your Mac. It's going to open this new track dialog box. You want to come over here to your tracks and select aux input. I'm going to create this green track, which is an aux track. There's no audio being held on the aux track, but it is used for routing. So I'm going to call this the kick bus. Send the kick bus to the sub bus. Take our 2 kick tracks, holding Alt-Shift, which is due to all. We're going to go send them to the kick bus. And then finally, I'm going to Control or Command click the S to solo save them. So now I could get to control my kick drums with one fader like this. Now that they're grouped together, what I'm going to do is compress them. I'm going to come up here and I'm going to grab this 9.3 compressor. And you can see it has the basic compression controls. We'll start with threshold because that's the most important. And we can already see that the signal is pretty significantly over the threshold. So I'm going to bring it up. And when the signal is below the threshold, there's no compression that's going to be applied. When it's above the threshold, that's when compression starts being applied based on these other parameters. So the second thing we're going to do is we're going to adjust the ratio. The ratio is how aggressive the compression is. It's set, right now it's set at 3:1. And what that means is for every 3 decibels over the threshold that the signal goes, only the output signal is only going to go up by 1 decibel. So I can bring it down if I want and have it be really gentle, like a 1.3:1. And you can see over here in our gain reduction meter that we're not really getting much gain reduction out of it. If I go back up to 3:1, we're getting about 6 decibels of gain reduction. You can tell by the line there is what it's actually being reduced to. Since the transient is so fast, we're not actually seeing sustained reduction. I can go all the way up to 100:1, which basically means that no signal is going to be going over the threshold, and we're seeing we're getting more compression than we were otherwise getting. Mm. 100:1's a bit too aggressive. We do want to maintain some of the transients of the natural drum while still controlling it. So 3:1's a good starting spot. Next, we're going to talk about attack. Attack is how long it takes the compressor to apply the full amount of compression after the signal goes over the threshold. It's not a delay in compression. Compression starts immediately after the signal goes over the threshold, but depending on how you've set your attack time, there might not really be any audible compression. If I push it up to 300 milliseconds, we're not getting any compression at all because the transient has a chance to finish and go back below the threshold before the compressor actually has a chance to act. If I bring it down here, it's catching everything. So there's a real aggressive application of compression, and you can see because of that, we're getting a lot more compression out of it. 10 milliseconds is a good starting place for drums, which is why it's the default. Release works the opposite to what you'd expect from attack. It is how long it takes after the signal goes below the threshold for it to stop compressing. So we can have a very long release, and it basically just stays compressed. Or we can have a very short release, and it barely gets compressed at all. The release is actually shorter than the attack right now. Again, the default is really good for drums, so I'm going to go back to the 80 and let's listen to the difference. The first thing we'll notice is that the compressed signal is quieter. That's because we're getting about 6 decibels of compression. I'm going to use this gain knob right here to raise the level back up so we can actually do a side-by-side comparison. So you'll notice the main thing that it's doing is because it's smushing down the audio signal, it's actually extending the sustain of the drum, which is sort of why we use drum compression on these close elements. We want to get a little bit more of that tone out of it, as well as really be able to control the amount of punch we get out of it. So if we listen to the very front of the sound to the punch aspect, we can actually add a little bit more attack. And so around 14 it's closer to the actual punch, but it should still be extending the release. Yeah, so we have a slightly longer tail, which is good for us. If we want to control that attack a little bit more, we can make it shorter. And a shorter attack will help us better even out the performance. So this now comes down to a creative decision. Do we want to add more punch and dynamics to the drum while bringing out that sustain, or do we want to really control it by tightening up the attack? And I think around 8 should be good for us. Now that we have our microphones EQ'd and the combined signal compressed, I'm now going to come here and add one more EQ to sort of do some final emphasis after we have after our compression. There's a continuously ongoing debate as to whether or not it's better to compress before or to EQ before or after compression, and the actual answer is that they both have their own particular effect that they add. I like cleaning up a signal before compression, like we did here, because the compressor is going to react to certain frequencies, and this allows it allows us to better tailor the frequencies that it's going to be reacting to. This 60 hertz boost is probably going to be what it's going to be clamping down on. But because the compression narrows the dynamic range, we're actually going to lose some of the cuts that we have here. So we can come back now and probably emphasize this fundamental and the more snap of the drum, and probably do another mid-range cut, similar to what we did for this one, but likely less extreme. You can hear there was still a little bit of the bouncy sound, and by adding another cut, we really got rid of it. Let's go ahead and instead of specifically boosting 60 hertz, let's try a low frequency shelf. So shelf EQs, they have a corner frequency like our high pass and low pass filters, but instead of rolling off all sound, you either boost or you cut everything either below in this case or above the corner frequency. I'm going to give this a pretty significant boost and play and adjust the frequencies as we need to. So that brings in a lot more low end. Let's do a quick comparison then between leaving it here and doing a boost at 60 like we did on our kick in to hear the difference between Belfry filter and our shelf filter. So the bell filter is a lot more focused, whereas the shelf sort of doesn't change the tone of the drum as much as your bell filter is going to. Finally, I'm going to add some more snap in. Excuse me. So at about 7.5 kilohertz, we're getting a good snap out of it. And one thing you'll notice is that the bigger the drum, the higher the frequency you're looking at when it comes to boosting like that stick or that batter sound. So that, excuse me, that comes in play when adjusting the toms as well. So let's take a listen to what the kick sounds like with the overheads, make some adjustments there, and then I'll give you a chance to play around with kick mixing yourself. So that's pretty good. So now take a couple minutes to play around with your own EQs and your own compression. Be mindful of the phase changes that we made, and finally blend it in with your overheads and your front of kit to start building up the sound of the drums that we're after. And let me know when you're ready to continue. Okay, so now let's go to the snares, and we're going to do the exact same thing we did before, starting with our snare top so we can listen to the sound that we get out of it, then listening to our snare bottom, compressing them together, and blending them in with our overheads. The first thing I'm hearing is that it has a lot of sound of the snares in it, and for our demonstration, I actually don't want that in this microphone. So that's the first thing I'm going to try and take out. So next I'm going to actually engage this high pass filter. You will typically find yourself using a high pass filter on a lot of instruments that aren't bass heavy, especially for like our multi-mic drums. They'll pick up a lot of that low end that isn't necessarily going to be giving you a lot of musical information, and it can cause what is known as frequency masking. So that is when there are two sources playing the same frequencies at roughly the same volume. The louder one is going to be what you hear, so you can actually lose instruments if you aren't mindful of how the frequencies are interacting with each other. So I'm going to give it a pretty aggressive bell just so we can more easily hear what we're doing. And I'm going to choke it up to the point where we start losing some of that low end tone. And then roll it back off a little bit. You can barely hear the difference, but it is going to be cutting out some information. I'm going to load up a plugin that'll let us see the waveform as or see the spectrum of the wave as we're playing, and so we'll get to see the difference. Actually, this is looks like the sample's pretty extremely taken care of, so we'll try that on the next one. Next, I'm going to bring up the fundamental of the sample to really add some more energy to it. Because this defaults to a shelf, I'm going to set it to a bell, and like with everything else, I'm going to do a sweep and boost to find the frequency that I'm after. You'll notice that I'm playing around with this Q knob. This is known as the Q, or the bandwidth, and it determines how wide your bell is. So if it's really narrow, we'll get a lot more ringiness out of it, and it's going to affect a smaller portion of the frequency spectrum. Typically, the wider the bandwidth, the more natural it'll sound, and you will probably find yourself using narrower bandwidths to cut, because you can be more surgical, and wider bandwidths to boost because it'll be more natural. I like using narrow ones when I'm looking for frequencies. So that really brings in a lot of low-end power that we weren't having before, which is one of the things that we want to get from our close snare mic. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find that ring that we have on certain hits, and I'm going to cut it out because I don't necessarily want the drum to be ringing on this type of song. That's a personal preference kind of thing, so it really depends on what you're after. But I'm going to go ahead and boost and sweep again. So there we go. I got rid of some of the ring. It really drastically changes the tone of the drum. Let me go back to this low frequency one real quick. There we go. So I put it up to 160, and I'm getting a lot more low end that I want out of that. Finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this frequency band right here and find a frequency that emphasizes the stick hit. Right there. So now I've got a really solid hit from the drumstick and have a snare sound that's drastically different, but one that I think fits the song and allows this close mic to do what we want it to. So with the EQ and without. So next I'm going to bring in this snare bottom mic, which is placed under the drum, sort of a couple inches away from the actual snares. So you can hear it's got a lot of tone with it, a lot more focused on the sound of the snares. And because the underhead is tuned higher than the upper head, the ring we're getting out of it is going to be higher than the ring we get out of the snare top. So I'm going to load up an EQ, and we're going to take a look at this spectrum analyzer to see what the sound actually looks like. So you can see we have a lot of emphasis right up here. Don't have a lot of the really highs where we can get some snare sound out of. So we're going to start with that. I'm going to use a high shelf. If I bring it down over here around 6 kilohertz, we really hear a lot of the snares coming out. If I push it more towards 12, it's sort of something that we more sense than actually hear. I'm going to go back to 6. Because I really want control over those snares. I'm going to come up here to the bandwidth. I'm going to open it up a little bit so it's a lot smoother and a lot more natural. Next, I'm going to find a frequency to emphasize. And that's going to be roughly the same frequency I was boosting on the snare top. And I don't like that ring, so I'm going to cut that out. You can hear without the EQ, it sort of sounds a little flat. With the EQ, we have some more tone, it's a lot tighter, and we have more of that snare sound. Now I'm going to listen to both of them at the same time and bring in this snare bottom, so now I can have faders that actually control the level of the snare instead of having to EQ it, because when you are EQing, you're affecting other elements of the sound than what you necessarily want to. So this multi-miking approach allows you to have this kind of fine control over the various elements of the drums. So having them pretty even actually is working out for me. Let's take a quick look to listen to the difference. The snare top, and the snare bottom, and together. So just like we did with the kick, we're going to create another bus. And it's already mono, so all I need to do is hold Control or Command down arrow, and it's going to send it to an aux. And since we can put in a name, I'm going to come over here, call the snare bus, route the snare bus to our sub bus, and route the snare tracks to our snare bus, solo the snare bus, solo save the snare tracks. Solo save just means that it'll keep playing regardless if something else is soloed. So we do that so we can now have control over our snare sound in general with our single track. Now we're going to bring up our compressors and do the same thing that we did for our kick drum. First, we're going to find the threshold. And you can hear, just like with this default sound, even more so than with the kick, you can hear like the sound of the compressor. It's almost like puffing out air. Without it, it sounds more natural. This over-compressed sound can be desirable if you want your mixes to sound processed. That comes down to like the general creative direction that you're after. Because while this can sound cool, it's not necessarily what you want. So like with the kick drum, we're going to go a little gentler with it. First step is to adjust the threshold. Right about there is pretty good. And now we're going to adjust our other parameters. And I do want it to be a bit aggressive. So I'm going to adjust the ratio up to 6. Compared with 3, I'm not necessarily hearing the compression as much. Having a long attack time still allows us to have the punch that we're after. If I shorten the attack time, we lose that aggression of the drum. If I lengthen it, so at 10, I'm still hearing it a little too much. I think 16 gives us a really nice attack to the drum while still preserving some of the sound. When it comes to release, you typically want it to be able to reset to no compression between the hits. That gives you a nice, it preserves sort of like the attack sound of the drum. So I'm going to keep it around here at 52. And I think that's good for our snare compression. Finally, I'm going to come back, add an EQ, and just bring out some of the lows. Right there's pretty good. And find that stick. And then a quick boost with a shelf. brings up our snare sound, and we have a pretty decent snare going. Let's listen to it with the overheads and make adjustments as we go. And there we go. So far, you can hear we're already bringing in some life to the song and starting to have these elements jump out. Next up are going to be the overheads, but I'll give you a second to play around with your snare drums. Well, while I wait for Angie to get back, I am just going to come here and play around with this base DI. Sticking to stock plugins, I'm going to use this 11 Lite, which is based on Avid's 11 rack, and hear what it sounds like. Well, the 11 Lite doesn't really have a lot of options, so let's go to the regular 11. And let's see where we have options for. What's this one? Not quite what I'm after. Where would it even be? So this is what's known as an amp sim, which recreates the sound of various amplifiers. You can see we have a whole bunch of options, including a bunch of vintage ones. And we can change our we should be able to change our cab type. What's really cool from my perspective is that we have a few different microphones to choose from. So I'm going to load up the 421, which is a nice classic bass microphone. And I'm going to come here and I'm going to load up the 11-2 cab. And this just is a cab. So if we go back to the main one, you can see right here we have a cab so we get to choose from. And you can hear the cabs too make a significant difference on the tone of the bass. So it really comes down to what it is that you are listening to, and you can come up with some really cool combinations just playing around with this software. There are third-party options, such as, if I can find it, Overloud's EHU plugin, and there we have it loaded up. The cool thing about this one is, I think this is the Bassman, but it also has plugins that you can play around with. So add a fuzz plugin in, I can add it in there, choose which order it is. And just play around with some stuff. Hi, Angie.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I just was playing around with amp sims.
Oh, awesome.
So I went ahead and created a stereo aux track to route the overheads into. And because I want to work on them like as a unit, the first thing I'm going to do is get a nice balance between the overheads and the front of kit, or actually, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to EQ this front of kit mic, because this is a really interesting one, and I want to be able to have it do what I want it to do before blending it together with the other ones. So you can see that there's a lot of information, especially with the toms and the less so the kick drum, but around here, that is what I was talking about when it comes to low end that we might not necessarily want, because for this mic, I'm really just after what it does to the snare drum. I think that sounds really cool. So if we look over here to this low end, if I bring up this filter, you can see it's starting to roll off those low frequencies that I don't want. I'm now going to come and I'm going to find that right around here, the 160 that we like for everything. And get that really solid. And instead of I'm going to use this low pass. To cut out some of the cymbals. And because I want to get really crazy with it, what I'm going to do, come up here to Dynamics and load up this BF76. So the BF76 is what is known as an analog modeled plugin. It is based on a plugin that's, or a compressor that's known as the 1176, and it's a really classic compressor, really classic sound. The interesting thing to keep in mind is that the higher numbers are the faster ones, and the lower numbers are the slower ones, sort of the opposite of what you'd expect. And it's a really fast, aggressive compressor. So if I have the attack at slowest, the release at fastest, and I start playing, you can hear the sound come in. And the thing to keep in mind with this one is that there's a fixed threshold, so you're actually adjusting the volume as you go in. But this is not all that I want to do. What I want to do is hold shift and click these ratio buttons, which really engages this really aggressive behavior that wasn't necessarily, it was sort of like discovered by accident. This was not intended sound, but it became really popular. So I'm going to tighten up the attack a bit. And it's sort of really bringing everything out. So now what I'm going to do is tuck this in under the normal overheads. And it's bringing out a lot of the hat, so I'm going to go and find a cut for that. There we go. So just tucking it in to sort of like bring up this really cool character from the sound. And that's what I like about like these extra mics that I get to put up, because it really does allow you to really cultivate interesting character to it. So now I'm going to come over here and I'm going to load up another EQ. And now we're going to EQ these three as a cohesive overhead mic setup. When it comes to mixing overheads, I really end up focusing on like emphasizing the individual elements of the drum kit. So I'm going to start by with this low frequency band and just work my way up, and I'm going to keep it as a shelf because I'm not after necessarily changing the tone. I have my close mics for that. Plus, I also want to emphasize the toms a little bit, so keeping it as a shelf will allow me to do that. That's pretty good. Next, I'm going to see if there's anything in the mid-range that's bothering me. Sounds kind of like hollow there, so I'm going to cut that out. I want to emphasize the hat a little bit. Just to give it a little bit extra flavor. And you can hear how that really, like, widens the stereo image. And finally, I'm going to add a little bit of a boost, again with a shelf, but make it really wide and put it over all the way at 20 kilohertz. Just to brighten things up. So now that I have my overheads EQ'd, I'm not going to compress them because compressing overheads can cause some whooshiness in the cymbals where the tail actually is, the volume of the tail actually comes up, which is not necessarily a good thing. But I bring these other two in. Do some adjustments, and you can see with the overheads, the snare, and the kick, we have a pretty solid drum tone right now. Next, before doing the hats and the rides, I'm going to come over here to the rooms. The rooms are my favorite microphones because every single acoustic space that you're recording in sounds different, and it really helps you give the recording a sense of space and uniqueness. So I've got my two rooms. Looks like this one's a little louder, so I'm just going to bring down the volume to even it out. And now, like what I did for the overheads, I'm going to create a stereo aux track. So, stereo aux track, rooms, and to the sub bus. And to the room bus, solo save, and I'm oddly lost some signal, so now, that is an interesting problem. Just going to try doing it all again. Create a room, bus, send it to the sub bus, take both my room tracks, send them to the room bus. There we go. So again, this track is a little louder, so I'm going to just bring it down till it's even. And you can hear how cool that sounds. So, I'm going to start EQing. I'm going to engage a high-pass filter to cut out some of those lows because I really want them from the close mics. The hi-hat's a little too prevalent in this. I'm going to cut that. Engage this low-pass filter to darken up the sound a little bit. Important to keep in mind that as sound goes further away from its source, it loses high-end information. So we already have a darker sound going into the microphones, but I'm just going to emphasize that a little bit to give it a greater sense of depth. And just like the overheads, I don't think I'm going to compress. I'm just going to listen to it real quick. Actually, yeah, let's do some compression. I'm not really hearing any problems with the cymbals, and since the cymbals are going to be more prevalent in the overhead mics, this should be fine. And now I am going to bring these in and blend it with the overheads. And we get to make a creative decision here. It's what kind of distance do we want the drums to sound like they're being performed at? The louder the room bus goes, the greater sense of distance we're going to get. Quieter, it's going to sound more up close, more intimate, like it's in a drier room. Around equal, I think, is going to be really solid for us. Next, and if you listen, you can really hear the snare in particular, how it starts centered and gets wider as the sound progresses over time. That's a cool way you can add stereo information and like stereo artistry. Before we move on to the other mics, I'm just going to load up a delay here. The reason why I'm loading up a delay on the room is because this allows me to, again, adjust the sense of space. Every sound travels about 1 foot every millisecond, so adding a little bit of extra delay, I said this is only around 12 feet, so about 12 milliseconds, helps increase the sense of space. So bumping it up to 35 gives us a greater, gives us some slap to it. So that's going to increase the sense of the size of the space that we're in. And give it a little bit more depth, as well as give it more of that stereo information, because now there's a greater amount of time between when the snare initially hits and when it finishes off with the decay of the room microphone. So now I'm going to bring in the hat microphone. And you can already hear the hat microphone kind of doesn't sound good to begin with. That's okay. What we're after with the hat microphone is these frequencies. It's really just about getting a little extra emphasis and a little extra closeness from the hat, so that we don't have to be as drastic with our overheads to get it prevalent there. So I've got these boosts, and now I'm going to bring in my high-pass filter and cut as much as I can. And you can hear that that's a pretty not enjoyable sound. But when I bring it in with the overheads and just kind of tuck it in, it helps me get a greater sense of space out of it, and a little bit more closeness, because we're emphasizing those higher frequencies and having it panned out more than we are with our general overheads. The same goes for the ride, but I gotta find a place where the ride is being played. I think it's like right here. No, that is a tom fill. Right there. Come on. All right, so like with the hat, I hear the sound that I want. I'm going to go and emphasize that. In particular, it's that ring. Right about there. Going to add some brightness to it. And then I'm going to bring in this high pass filter and get just that part of the sound. And then again, just slowly bring it in until I hear what I want. And you can hear in context with the overheads, it doesn't have that like really weak sound that we were getting just by itself. So our drums so far. Really sounding more like a kit in a room. Doesn't have that flatness that we were having before. And now all we need to do is take care of our toms. So let's do that real quick. I'm going to create a single aux track for the rack. Send it to the sub bus. Send it to the rack bus. And then again, go to the floors. Send this to the sub bus. Take our floors to go to the floor bus. Oh, save. And now let's find ourselves. There's a fill. Let's go for this big one over here. We're going to get that on a loop. And let's listen to what the individual microphones do. Here's the top mic. This is the most common mic you see, and a lot of times in recording, you just use the top mic. There's the bottom mic. It gives it a different character because the tuning is different. I found personally that blending these together really allows us to get the drum to sound more like the drum does in the room as opposed to like having your ear pressed against it. I'm still going to use the majority of the sound from this top, and then I'm just going to bring in this bottom. And you can hear how the low end started to get more filled out as I brought that in. So without the bottom, it gives it a different character. I'm just going to leave these two together. I'm not going to EQ them separately because now they're functioning as a cohesive unit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I come in here is I'm going to emphasize that fundamental. Is about right there. Now that I've found the fundamental, I'm going to actually roll off the low end because while the toms have a lot of low end, it can really muddy up with the kick and the bass. You can hear it's really cutting out a lot of the ring that we don't want while giving us the tone that we do. Next, I'm going to look to see if there's anything in the middle here that I don't like. And I'm going to boost the stick. And that is pretty good for some EQ. Let's bring in our compressor. Now, because of how quickly he's playing this fill, we're not going to be able to really set the release slow enough that we allow it to reset between stick hits, and that's okay. Because we're still getting compression on this initial hit, it's bringing out the stick a little bit and bringing out the sustain. So no compression, compression. And I think I'm happy with the rack just like that. Let's go find the floor. And same thing that we did before. Starting with the floor top, bringing in the floor bottom. Without the bottom, and I'm going to bring in the EQ that we're doing. And again, I'm going to find the fundamental. There we go. So around 75. I'm now going to go and clean up the low end. So by rolling out that low end, it's getting rid of a lot of the unwanted ringiness and allowing us to focus on that fundamental. I'm now going to go listen to the mid-range. Cut that out. And add some stick to it. And remember what I said about the kick drum. We want higher frequencies. Even something as extreme as 10K. Without it, it sounds pretty flat. With it, it sounds closer to what it would sound like if you're sitting next to the drum as you're playing it. And ultimately, when it comes to drum mixing, regardless of the depth that I'm going for, I like it to sound as close to what the drummer is going to hear as possible. So again, I'm going to set my compressor. Set my attack. And with the compressor, it's bringing out a lot of that low ring that I actually don't like out of this drum. So I am going to choose to not compress it. The drummer's performance is relatively consistent, so we don't necessarily need to worry about losing hits. I'm going to pan it out. And now, after all of that, we should have some drums. Any questions? So for looping, you need to make sure that loop is set, is turned on. You can see here in the transport control, it's got this little loop setting. Next, what you do is you make a selection, and it needs to be a long enough selection. Otherwise, it won't loop. So if I do something like this, it's not going to loop. But if I do something like this, it'll it'll loop the signal, which is really great for like when you want to focus on small stuff like tom fills. I'll also use loop if I'm focusing on like a specific section of the song. But it's really one of the more valuable tools that a DAW is going to have for you. Now that we have our drums, we have one final thing to do, which is to compress the drums as a whole. I'm going to create one more stereo aux, call it our drum bus. Then the drum bus, not to itself, to the sub bus. Solo safe it. And now I need to select everything that's going to the sub bus. And send these to the drum bus so we can compress the drum bus. What's nice about compressing the drum bus is that it really gives everything the sense of it working together as a cohesive unit. I don't tend to compress it too much, like at most like 3 decibels, but we'll see what it sounds like. So you can hear it really pushes down the cymbals, lets the snare jump out a lot, and it extends the sustain so it actually is giving us more room tone. With that set, I'd probably go and make some additional adjustments. And call it good on that. So now we have drums, and it only took us 2 hours. Drums tend to take the longest because they have the most microphones and they're the most fun, at least in my opinion. So now we get to move on to the bass. We have 2 basses right here, so I'm just going to create a mono aux track after both of them, and both to the send them both to the bass, and finally solo safe them all. I'm going to mute out these other ones, and now we're going to listen to the three tracks that we got for our bass. We have a DI and 2 different microphones aimed at different parts of the speakers. When it comes to amps, there are generally 3 main sonic areas that you get that you can mic up. There's the dust cap, the edge between the cap, and the rest of the speaker, and then like the woofer area. And each of those is going to produce a different tone. And so miking each separately is going to give you a chance to have a greater control over that tone and be able to blend everything together the way you want it to. So we're going to start with the DI. You can hear really nice, clean, like full spectrum. If we then bring in this first amp microphone, you can hear definitely the sound of the amp, the grit that he's adding to it, and it's a lot more sort of mid-range focus as opposed to the lows of the DI. This other amp is closer to the to the outside of the speaker, and so it's picking up more lows. But since it's a different microphone, it has a different frequency response. So what we can do then is blend all three of them together to get ourselves a bass tone that's a combination of the various elements that we want. So I'm going to start with this one as the bass, the main one, keeping it at 0, and I'm going to bring in this amp until it sounds the way that I want it to. And I'm just going to find a loop that we can do so we don't lose the signal when it goes to those accent points. So there, it brings in a lot of body, but we still don't have a lot of low end. So I am going to bring in this DI and see what we can get out of that. So you can hear it really makes a difference. But the thing about DIs, and we'll zoom in to take a look at it, is that they tend to arrive slightly before the amp signal. So we can see it coming in, and this is noise, and this is where it starts, and it's off by really a small amount. Find a 0 point. These two are good. Just a smidge, but it's enough that what we need to do is test the phase. I'm going to load up the EQ1, press play, and now I'm going to swap through the phases to hear what flipping the DI is going to make the sound like. So you can hear already a big difference in tone. And unlike with the drums, it's not really easy to know which is better. It comes down to what you prefer. So flipped is a lot more mid-range focused, and I kind of like the sound we have with it being not flipped, so that's where we're going to leave it. Before we move on to mixing bass, what I want to do is recreate, well, actually, yeah, let's mix our bass. We have a nice blend here, but what I want to do is make sure that we're emphasizing the elements that we want to out of each of our microphones. So I'm going to mute those two, load up an EQ, and already I'm hearing that there's a solid low right about there. And I also am hearing a lot of like grit coming out of this microphone. So right there, you hear how it, the sound really opens up. Now I'm going to check to see if there's anything I want to cut. The answer is no. So I'm going to bring in the other one and do the same thing. And this one's a bit more mid-rangey, so I'm going to look for something there. Like right there. There's a really strong harmonic in this like 1 to 200 hertz range. So I'm cutting it out to really just a bit to even up the frequency response across the range. Now I'm going to bring in the DI. And for the DI, I want that low end, but I'm going to use a shelf this time because I don't want to add too much emphasis. Unlike with the drums, the fundamentals of the bass notes are changing because the drum or the bassist is playing different notes than just one thing that's tuned to a specific frequency. So giving it a boost will help bring up those lows without adding too much emphasis to any particular note, because we do want everything pretty even across. I'm again going to go boost over here like I did on one of the microphones to bring out some of the strumming. And I think we have a solid bass tone. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy everything over to this other one. I'll put this microphone at 0 and then I'm going to double click. Oh, it's not going to let me do it on this one. I am going to double click on the volume input. Not going to let me do it either. Going to make adjustments so that it matches what I did over here. So that one's 5.4, this one's 4.3, and to do fine adjustments, you hold Control or Command. Next, I'm going to copy over the plugins. So to do that, you hold Alt, drag the plugin over, and it'll create a copy of the plugin as well as its settings. So now I can unmute that. And once we hit these accents over here, we have the same tone that we were getting before. Next, what I'm going to do is, now that everything has been combined together, just like with the drums, I'm going to add in some compression. I'm going to come up here to Dynamics, and since, Angie, I know you have the Pro plugs, I am going to load up this BF2A. This is a different compressor based on the Teletronics LA2A compressor, nice classic tube-based compressor. You see it has a few, only a few knobs. This is the makeup gain knob. This is the knob that adjusts the threshold. You can choose whether or not you're looking at the amount of gain reduction or the amount of level that's coming out of it. And you can choose between compressor mode and limit mode. This changes the ratio. So compressor, I believe, is 4:1. Limit is 10:1. And the big takeaway about this compressor is that it's an optical style release as opposed to the BF76, which is a FET style compressor. That has to do with how the compressors are made and how they work, and it's going to produce a different sound. In particular, the release, it's going to be a little smoother and a little less linear, and it sounds excellent on bass. So let's get some compression going. And you can hear it's adding a little bit of extra pick sound to it. That's because this is a slower moving compressor, so it shapes the transient a little bit more than a more aggressive compressor would. So with the compressor, without the compressor. especially like those low ends. It really tames that and gives it a real nice tone. The final thing I want to do is add a teeny bit of distortion to it, because while it's already distorted, I don't want to use that distortion. While it's already distorted, I want a little bit more grit out of it. That's too much grit. I'm going to bring the drive down to 0 and push it up. And there we go. Just around 1 is going to add a little bit of extra grit that's going to make it pop. So I will give you a second now to play around with your own bass compression and let me know when you're ready. We'll move on to guitars. All right, guitars. Now we have 2 different performances here. This is what's known as doubling, and we double guitars in particular because it can produce this really cool sound when hand out in general. When they're panned the same like they are now, just centered, it really solidifies the performance and makes it feel thicker, which is why doubling and even quadrupling is really common when it comes to rock music. The reason why this works is because there's small variations in timing in the performance and even pitch, because depending on how heavy you strum, it's going to change the pitch of what you're playing. So, so doubling it like this, that sort of like fills in the gaps that the other ones, that the other performance would always have, as well as makes it so there's no 100% definite start and stop point for every chord. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with one of them. And we're going to listen to the difference between the microphones. Again, as with the bass, 2 different microphones aimed at 2 different parts of the speaker. We have this one, it's nice, focused, mid-range, not too harsh. And this one, which has I need to get a better loop going. And this one, which has a lot more high-end focus. So what we need to do is not only clean up these signals, but also blend them together in a way that works for our purposes, because just having them together like this, you can hear that it has a wider frequency response than when they're separate. But we don't necessarily want them to be like evenly blended like that. We want to have control over the tone that we can get. So I'm going to actually start with this one, because listening to it, I hear a lot of unwanted white noise. You don't tend to want a lot of white noise in your distorted guitar signal because there's a lot of it, but it also doesn't have any musical information. So it's just there, it's taking up frequency space, it's masking the sound that the actual musical information, and it doesn't really sound good unless you're actually after that tone, which we aren't for this song. So like Like with everything else, I'm going to use a narrower bandwidth, and I'm going to boost, and I'm going to find where the white noise is that I don't like. So that is sort of like where I'm after. You can tell that it's white noise because the hiss of it stays the same as the notes are being changed. And I'm going to go ahead and cut. And you can already hear that we're getting a lot more musical information out of it. Next, what I'm going to do is engage the high-pass filter, and like before, I'm going to bring up my spectrum analyzer so you can see what we're doing. You can see that there's information going all the way down to below 60 hertz, and that's taking up needed frequency space. When it comes to digital audio, there's a finite amount of volume that your song can have. So by having this unwanted information down there, not only is it taking up space from the bass and the drums, but it's taking up overall headroom for the song. So it actually would make your song sound quieter, leaving this information in as opposed to cutting it out. So I'm going to gauge the high-pass filter and make it really aggressive, and just bring it up, and we'll look at what happens to this low-end information. You can see there it comes back a lot, and a lot of it is sort of just like sound when he like takes his hand off of the guitar. Now that's a little too chirped as far as like losing the low end. I'm going to back it off a bit. And we're not really losing a lot of our information there. Now this is a pretty solid tone already. But I'm going to go ahead and give it a little boost in the low end. Just to compensate a bit for what we're doing with the high-pass filter, to bring back some of that, kind of that power that we want. Next, I'm going to go over to this one, and again, I'm going to load up the EQ, and to start, I'm going to engage this high-pass filter, not that extreme. That's pretty good. Again, give it a little boost. And boosting out at 128 and boosting out at 190. The reason why I'm doing different frequencies is because that's where it's jumping out at me as sounding good. And by blending them together, we'll get a different character for those frequencies down there. Next, what I want to do is I want to boost these sort of upper mids. This is where you get a lot of, like this upper mid frequency range is one of the more important frequency ranges. It is where you get your speech intelligibility, it's where the human ear is most sensitive, and it's where you get a lot of fun guitar sounds. So this mic in particular is a really good, rich sounding response up here. So I'm just going to emphasize it a little bit. There we go. That sounds pretty cool. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend them in together, and we'll hear the results that we get. So one mic, the other mic, and together we get a blend that's greater than a tone that's greater than what we could achieve with any one microphone. So like with the bass and the bass accents, I'm going to copy these over, but I'm not going to copy the overall levels of these. What I'm going to do is come up with a different blend, focusing more on this microphone. So with that together, you can hear we have a different sound for both of the guitar parts. By having a different blend, even though it's the same guitar from the same amp and the same pedals, it's going to give us a different, it's going to separate the parts a little bit more. So we're going to have greater amount of definition coming out of the guitars. So I'm going to start by unmuting so we can listen to the mono. And comparing them without the EQ that we did. You can hear that the white noise comes back in and is really sort of overpowering as far as the tone goes. And then the only thing left to do is put them up. So before we move on to the vocals, what I want to do is create a stereo aux track. And create a reverb for the guitars. These are pretty dry performances, and that is fine, but I do want to have a little bit extra control over the sense of space and a little extra control over like the tails of everything to bring it out a little bit. So I'm going to go to reverb, and I'm going to select the Air Spring Reverb, which is a model of a spring reverb, which is the kind of reverb you're going to find in a guitar amp. So it's really well suited for our purposes today. I'm going to bring down the fader and just blend it in. And that's a little too much. Definitely louder than what I want, but the decay time is a little too much. So I'm going to bring back the reverb time. I'm going to then adjust the pre-delay. Now, what a pre-delay does is it delays the amount of time between when the sound hits the reverb and when the reverb starts. So this allows us to get a bit more of the initial attack of the guitar before the reverb actually comes in. And now I'm just going to blend it in until I get the desired effect. So right about there, now it's muted to hear the difference. So what that does is it sort of thickens up the sound a little bit more, but also has a really cool effect when he's playing a little bit more shorter phrases, because we can actually then hear the reverb. That's one of the fun things that time-based effects can do. You actually are able to emphasize the effect, and it sounds pretty cool with the song. So that's guitars, at least for this. I'll give you a chance to play around and see what you can come up yourself. What do you mean? Like your mixing choices, how long you spend working on anything? When it sounds good, when it sounds cool, it's really easy to just get sucked into a mix and to spend dozens of hours working on it and second guessing every decision and trying every single plugin that you have available to you. And you can end up just really like chasing your tail. A lot of pro mixers recommend mixing quickly. Because of that, you can also get you sort of lose perspective the longer you work, and you can also experience ear fatigue where you aren't even accurately hearing what you're doing. So I try and go. I mean, I take more time doing it than for the class, but it's sort of the same approach. Like, I listen to the sound, I decide what I want to do, I figure out the best way to do it, and then once it sounds good the first time, then I leave it and don't go back to it unless it's later on in the mix and I'm either doing some fine tuning or I run into a situation where, like, once I get done with everything, I realize that, like, the guitars and the vocals are fighting for some frequencies, and then I go and clean things up then. But it's even then, if the second it sounds good, then I leave it because really, if you sort of fret over everything too much, you might at the end of the day make something, 2% better by spending 12 hours doing it instead of 4 to 6. And you have to ask yourself whether or not that 2% is worth the extra time and energy that goes into it. Generally, it's not. And usually, that extra 2% is completely subjective. Someone else might listen to both mixes and prefer the one that you did in 4 hours. So I hope that answers the question. Sweet. All right. Let's go do vocals. So again, we have we have 4 tracks split across 2 sets of doubles. So I'm going to start with just the one main track, and we're going to listen through and create a nice loop for ourselves. And again, we're going to first listen to what we want, or listen to what we think needs to be done, and then do some additional processing.
I know she's the queen of the radio dial, and she's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while.
So I'm going to load up the
But you know that she's there,
EQ, and I'm going to use my high pass
Takes a
filter
minute
to cut out some of
understand
that
it, but you
unwanted
know it
low end.
when it's there. But I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab, 'cause she's a pirate radio queen. I know she's the queen of the radio dial, and she's got jet black hair, but
Now I'm
I
going to
know
give
she only
him
speaks every
some
once in a
low end
while.
emphasis
But
just
you know that
to
she's there, and I know it takes
give
a
some
minute
more
to understand it, but you
power
know
to
it
his
when
voice.
it's there. But I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab, 'cause she's a pirate radio queen.
I know
I
then.
know she's the queen of the radio dial,
There we go.
and she's got
But around
jet black
there's
hair, but I
the
know
actual
she only
fundamental
speaks
for his
every once in
voice.
a while.
I'm going to
But you
boost
know
that.
that she's there, and I know it takes a minute to understand it, but
Next,
you
just
know
like
it
what we did
when
with
it's
the
there.
guitar,
And I
I'm going to
know
go
that
for the
she
speech
sleeps on the way to the
intelligibility section.
cab, 'cause she's a pirate radio queen.
Right there, you can hear how
I
the
know
sound
she's a queen of the
of his voice
radio
really
dial.
opens up and he starts
And
to
she's
sound
got jet black
closer,
hair,
and that's
but
what
I
we're
know she only
after.
speaks every once
We
in a
want it
while.
to sound like he's
But
right
you
in our
know
face
that
because
she's
the
there, and
vocal
I know
is sort of
it.
like the
Takes a minute to
very
understand it, but you know it
the
when
front
it's there.
of
And I know
the
that she sleeps
of
on
the
the way to
sonic
the
spectrum.
cab, 'cause she's a pirate radio
If you kind of think of
queen.
it as a
I know she's a
pyramid,
queen of
the
the
vocals
radio
are the
dial.
capstone, the drums are
She's
the
got
bass.
jet black hair, but I know
Then
she
it
only
goes to the bass
speaks
guitar,
every
then it
once
goes
in
to
a
regular
while.
guitars.
But you know
You
that
can
she's
try
there,
and
and I
do that
know
as
it.
like
Takes a
a
minute
sonic
to
spectrum kind of thing,
understand
where
it, but
you
you
would
know it when it's there.
pan your
And I know
guitars
that she
a little
sleeps on the way to
narrower.
the cab,
But
'cause she's a pirate
I kind
radio
of focus
queen.
more on like
I
frequency
know
response
she's the
than
queen
necessary
of the
stereo
radio
image
dial.
because I don't
And she's got
necessarily
jet black
want
hair, but I know she
a
only
triangle.
speaks every once in a while. But you know that she's
Finally, what I'm
there,
going
and
to
I
do is I'm
know
going to
it.
boost these
Takes a minute
highs,
to
but I'm going to
understand
put
it,
the
but you know
frequency
it
all the
when
way
it's
up to
there.
20
And I know
kilohertz
that
and
she
get a
sleeps on the
really
way to
wide
the
bandwidth.
cab, 'cause
If I
she's
take
a
out this one, you
pirate
can see it's
radio
really
queen.
boosting
I know
everything
she's
going
a
down to
queen of the
1K.
radio dial.
I'm going to make
And
it a
she's
little
got jet
tighter.
black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while. But you know that she's there, and I
Bring that
know
in,
it.
and then
Takes
ease it
a
off a
minute
little bit.
to
So that adds some
understand
of
it, but
the
you know
air
it
back
when
into the
it's
vocal.
there. And I know that she sleeps on the way to
Next
the
up, we're going to
cab,
compress.
'cause
And
she's a
for
pirate radio queen.
this
I
vocal
know
compression,
she's
we're
a
actually
queen
going to
of
use
the
what is known
radio
as
dial.
dual stage
And she's
compression.
got jet
What
black
that
hair, but I know
is
she only
bringing in
speaks
two
every
different
once in a
compressors
while.
and
But you know that she's there, and I know
setting
it.
them so
Takes a
that they
minute
both
to
work
understand it,
on the
but you know
vocal.
it when it's
For
there.
this,
And
we
I
are going
know
to
that she
use
sleeps on the way to the cab,
our
'cause she's a
LA2A
pirate radio queen.
and
I know
our
she's the queen of the radio dial. And she's
1176.
got jet black hair,
The
but I know she
1176 is a
only speaks
lot
every once
faster
in
and
a
a lot more
while.
aggressive
But you know
than
that she's
the
there, and I
LA2A.
know it.
So what this
Takes a
allows us
minute
to do
understand
is
it, but you know it when it's
um,
there. And I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab,
use this
'cause she's
to
a pirate radio queen.
control the
I
peaks
know she's the
and
queen of the
this
radio
to
dial.
really shape
And she's got
the
jet
sound a little
black
bit.
hair, but I know she only speaks
That's
every
pretty
once in a while.
aggressive.
But you
There
know
we
that
go.
she's there, and I know it.
And now I'm going to
Takes a
compress
minute to
this
understand
one.
it, but you know it when it's there. And I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab, 'cause she's a pirate radio queen. I know she's the queen of the radio dial. And she's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while. But you know that she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand it, but you know it when it's there. And I know that she
So
sleeps
now
on
we're
the way to the
getting
cab, 'cause
between
she's a pirate radio queen.
like
I
5
know
and 10
she's the queen
decibels of
of the radio
compression,
dial.
really squishing it all
And she's
down,
got jet
evening
black
out the
hair, but
performance
I
and
know
making
she
sure that we
only
can hear
speaks
every
every
word
once
and
in a
every syllable.
while.
Because
you know that
vocals
she's
in
there, and I
particular, the
know it.
power
Takes
dies
a minute
off
to
the further into
understand
the
it, but
phrase
you
you
know
get.
it when it's there. And I know that
So
she
you tend to
sleeps
use a
on the
lot of
way to the
compression on vocals
cab,
because of
'cause
that.
she's a pirate
Um,
radio queen. I know she's the queen
If
of
we
the
got,
radio
if we were
dial.
just using one
And she's got
compressor
jet black
and
hair, but I
compressing
know she only speaks
this
every once
much,
in a while. But you know that
we'd
she's
start
there,
hearing
and I know
artifacts of the
it. Takes
compression
a
and it'd be a
minute
lot more
to
noticeable.
understand it, but
So
you
by
know it
spreading it
when
out
it's
across
there. And
multiple
I know that she
compressors,
sleeps on the way to the
we're
cab,
actually able
'cause
to
she's a pirate radio queen. I
have
know
better
she's the
control and a
queen of
better
the radio
sound. Plus, we
dial.
get the sonic
And she's
characteristics of both
got
these
jet black
compressors,
hair, but
and
I
since
know
they're
she
cool
only
compressors,
speaks every
that's fun
once
to
in a
have.
while. But
Next,
you
what
know
we're going
that
to
she's
do
there, and I
is
know
actually
it.
bring in the
Takes a minute
guitars.
to understand it, but you know it when it's there. And I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab, 'cause she's a pirate
And now
radio
that the
queen.
guitars are
I
brought in,
know
what we
she's
can
the
do is we
queen
can
of the
bring
radio
out
dial.
another
And she's
instance
got
of our
jet black hair,
EQ,
but I know she only speaks every once in a while.
and
But you know that she's there, and I know it.
EQ
Takes
the
a minute to
EQ the vocals
understand
so
it,
that
but
it
you
fits
know
well
it
with the
when
guitar.
it's there. And I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab, 'cause she's a pirate radio queen. I know she's the queen of the radio dial. And she's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks
So
every
right
once in a
around
while.
there, that's giving
But
us
you
some
know that she's
good
there, and I know it.
presence
Takes a
coming out.
minute
That's
to
working with the
understand it, but
guitars,
you know
even
it
though
when it's there. And I know
the
that she
guitars are
sleeps on
getting
the way to the
boosted.
cab, 'cause she's a
you pretty
pirate
much get the same
radio
thing. It's
queen.
allowing them to
I
compete
know
a
she's
little
the
more.
queen of the radio dial. And And she's got jet black hair, but I know she only
Next, I'm going to
speaks
add
every
some
once in
air
a
in.
while. But you know that she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand her, but you know it when it's there. And I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab. Cause she's a
finally,
pirate radio queen. I know she's the queen of the
boxiness I
radio
don't
dial.
like.
And she's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while. But you know that she's there, and I know
And
it.
then
Takes a
our,
minute to understand her, but you know it when
down the
it's
middle.
there. And I
And
know
that
that she
is
sleeps on
a
the way
pretty
to the
solid
cab. Cause she's a
vocal
pirate
tone.
radio queen. I know she's the queen of the radio dial.
I'm actually
She's
going to
got
back
jet black
off
hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a
that
while.
completely.
But you know that she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand her, but you know it when it's
And
there.
instead of
And I
cutting
know
this
that
one,
she sleeps on the way to the cab. Cause she's a
there we go.
radio
So I actually did a little bit of cut
I
on
know
this
she's
high
the
mid
queen
one.
of the radio
There's a lot
dial.
of energy
She's
on
got
his
jet
vocal in that
black hair,
part,
but I know she only
and
speaks
it's
every
also
once in a
where the
while.
guitars are
But you
sitting.
know that she's
So I can
there,
either
and I
have
know
them
it. Takes a
in
minute
conflict
to
at that frequency,
understand her,
or I
but you
can
know
cut
it
it to
when
give the
it's
guitars a
there.
little
And
bit
I
of
know
extra
that she
space.
sleeps on the way to the cab. Cause she's a pirate
Because of that,
radio
I'm going to look
queen.
at this
I know
low
she's
mid
the
at
queen of the
240,
radio dial.
and I'm going to come
She's
over
got
here,
jet black hair, but I know
and
she
I'm
only
going
speaks every
to
once in a while. But you know that she's
give it a
there, and
little
I
bit of a
know
cut at
it.
240.
Takes a minute to understand her, but you know it when it's there. And I know
And
that
by
she
doing
sleeps on the
that,
way to the cab. Cause she's a pirate radio queen.
you can actually
know
hear
she's
that
the
the
queen of the
vocal seems
radio
like it's getting
dial.
louder.
And she's got jet black hair, but
That's
I know
because
she
we're
only
making
speaks every
space
once in a
for
while.
that fundamental
But you
frequency
know
with the
that
vocal,
she's there, and I
and
know it. Takes a minute to
removing the
understand her,
frequency
but you
masking that
know
was
it
going on,
when
because the
it's
vocal
there. And I
was
know that she
in
sleeps on
competition
the
with
way
the
to the
guitar
cab.
in that frequency.
Cause she's a pirate radio
Next, I'm going to
queen.
copy over the
I know
settings
she's
to
the
the other
queen of the
vocals.
radio dial.
Another way to
She's got jet black hair, but I know she only
keep from
speaks every
spending too
once
much
in a
time on a
while.
mix is
But you
to
know that she's there, and I
identify
know it. Takes a
the
minute
similar
to
elements
understand her, but you
and to
know
make
it
sure that
when
you use
it's
the same
there.
settings
And
on
I know
everything.
that she sleeps on the
Because
way to the
otherwise,
cab. Cause she's a pirate
you could spend a lot of time EQing each
I
one
know she's
separately.
the queen of the radio
And
dial.
that's actually
She's
time that you'd
got
spend
jet
on the
black
mix.
hair, but I know she only speaks
Extra
every once in
time
a
to
while.
have
But you know
ear
that she's
fatigue,
there,
extra
and I know
time
it.
to like
Takes
lose
a
the
minute
perspective.
to
So
understand
now
her,
I'm going
but
to
you
bring
know
in
it
this
when
double,
it's there. And I
and
know
I'm
that
not
she
going to
sleeps
go
on the way
ahead
to the cab.
and have it
Cause
even
she's a
like that,
pirate radio
because
queen.
while it's a kind of a
I
cool
know she's
effect,
the
it's
queen of the
not what I'm
radio
after.
dial.
It's what I had
And
for the
she's
guitar,
got
so I
jet
want
black
something
hair, but
different
I
with the
know she only
vocals, and it's
speaks
being
every
able to
once
be
in a
in
while.
center.
But you
So
know
I'm going to
that
bring it
she's
in.
there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand her, but you know it when it's there. And I know that she sleeps on the
So
way to the
right about
cab.
there,
Cause she's a
I'm starting to hear the
radio
effect,
queen.
but I still have the
I
focus
know
of the
she's
single
the queen
vocal.
of the radio dial. And she's got jet black hair, but I
So that
know
sounds
she
pretty
only
cool.
speaks every once in a
I'm now going
while.
to group
But you
these two
know that
together
she's
so I
there,
keep
and I
that
know it.
balance.
Takes a
Right here.
minute to understand her, but you know it when it's there. And I know that
Next,
she
I'm going to
sleeps
go
on the
over
way to the cab.
these accents, and we're going to listen to what they do.
Reject, reject, reject.
So it's an additional emphasis on the word reject, and what I want to do is have those panned out.
Reject, reject, reject.
So it gives us this fun extra stereo push. I'm going to call them that. But what I'm also going to do now is come over here, and I'm just going to take out this 12 kilohertz boost. So what that'll do is it'll make these vocals sound like they're a little further back and allow these vocals to not feel that much crowded.
Reject, 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 reject.
There we go. I guess if you'd like to take a couple minutes to play around with vocal processing. Effects like delay and reverb. I mean, like, that's going to be what we do next. And as far as like amp sims or like distortion, I mean, you start by getting your basic levels and sort of getting a rough of the song together. Then you go through and you do your EQ and your compression to sort of tone shape and get it, get the emphasis that you want, get the space that you want, make sure you can hear all the elements, sort of like what we've done now. And then it's generally at the end that you add in your fun, cool effects. So like we did with the guitar, we got the tones exactly how we wanted them. We got the level set. It was really solid. And then we added in the verb to add that little extra element. And now that we have the vocals, exactly. So now we have the vocals done. We're going to add in a delay. Delays are fun. I like, especially for rock, I like having delays over reverb on the vocals, especially if I want to actually hear the effect that we have going. So one thing to note, when you're creating a send in Pro Tools, the fader starts at 0. So holding Alt and Shift, I'm just, you hold Alt, you click it, it goes up to, well, actual 0. So completely off infinity to 0. For the delay, I'm going to add in mod delay 3, which is our standard delay. And I'm going to click link here. It's a stereo delay, so I can have different delay times on both ears. But I want to start by getting a basic delay time.
I know she's the queen of the radio dial, and she's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while.
And 250 milliseconds is way too much. So I'm going to bring it all the way down to 0.
But you know it.
And now I'm going to slowly bring it up.
I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab, cause she's a pirate radio
You can hear
queen.
it like around 11. We're starting to get some weird
She'll tell
effects.
your mother
And
what it means.
effects like chorus
To
and
be a
doubling are
silent
actually
radio
flanging, are
be a
actually
pirate radio reject.
delay effects, which if we use our rate
I
and
know
our
she's the queen of the radio dial.
depth, we can
And
actually
she's
recreate
got
those
jet black
effects.
hair, but I know she only speaks every once
But
in
I
a
want
while.
a straight delay for this one.
But you know that she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand it, but you know it when it's there. But I know that she sleeps
So
on the way to the
around
cab.
117
'Cause she's a
milliseconds, that gives me the
pirate
effect
radio
that I'm after.
queen.
I'm going to then go
She'll
and
tell your
unlink them
mother what it means
and
to be a
add a little bit of
radio
extra milliseconds to this right delay, and you can hear it actually really opens up the stereo field, which is
I
great.
know she's a queen of the radio dial.
I'm now going to go and
And
use
she's
this low
got
pass
jet black
filter
hair, but I know she only speaks every once
to
in a
cut
while.
out everything over
But you know that she's there,
10
and I know
kilohertz.
it. Takes a minute to
What this is
understand
going
it,
to
but you
do
know
is,
it when
like
it's
with
there.
the
And I
other
know that she sleeps on the way
darkening
to
that
the
we've done,
cab.
it's
'Cause
going to make
she's
it
a
the delay
pirate
sound a little bit
radio
further back,
queen.
and it's going to open up that air
She'll
for
tell
the
your mother
vocals
what it
so
means
that they sound really front and
to
center and aren't
be a
getting muddled by the
silent
delay.
radio
The next thing we're going to play around is our
and
feedback
be a
control.
pirate radio reject.
Feedback takes the delayed signal
I know she's
and
the queen of
sends
the
it back
radio
into the
dial.
delay.
And she's
So
got
that's
jet black
what we
hair,
do
but
to
I
actually
know she only
create
speaks
a
every once
series
in a
of
while.
echoes. So right now we're
But
getting
you
the one
know that
delay.
she's there,
If
and
I bring up the
know it.
feedback,
Takes a minute to understand it, but you know it when it's there. And I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab, 'cause
you can
she's
hear
a
that we get
pirate
multiple echoes
radio
coming out of it.
queen. She'll tell your mother what it
I
means.
think that's pretty good. Finally,
to
we're going to
be
play
a
around with this
silent
modulation
radio
section. As I said, this is how you get effects like
sim,
chorus
be a
and flanging.
pirate radio reject.
I don't necessarily know what we want to get.
I know
think we're
she's
just
the
playing
queen
around
of the
with it.
radio dial. And she's
I'm gonna
got
go ahead and
jet
click
black hair,
link
but I know she
so that
only
we get
speaks
the
every once
effect
in
on
a
both sides.
while. But you know that
So you can
she's
hear
there,
adjusting
and
the
I
rate.
know
It's not
it.
doing anything
Takes a minute
because we
to
haven't
understand
adjusted
it,
the
but you
depth
know
yet.
it when it's there. But I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab, 'cause she's a
You
pirate
really don't need a
radio
lot
queen.
of depth in order to get the effect you want. You can hear
She'll
that we're
tell your mother what it means
getting some really weird, funny sounds
to
out of
be a
it.
silent
If I bring the
radio
depth back down,
and be a pirate radio reject. I know she's the queen of the radio
or
dial.
straight
And she's
delay,
got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every
and it
once in
gives
a
it a
while.
little bit of
But you know that
extra
she's
flavor
there,
that's
and
kinda
I
cool.
know it. Takes a minute to
So-
understand it, but you know it when it's there. But I know that she
I'm gonna
sleeps on
go
the way to the
and
cab.
fine-tune the
'Cause
delay
she's
volume.
a pirate radio queen. She'll tell your mother what it means to be a silent
And like with
radio
the guitar reverb, I really just wanted to add a bit of emphasis.
Radio reject.
And a cool effect that
I
comes
know
in
she's the
during
queen
at
of
like
the
the end of
radio
lines.
dial.
So
And
now
she's
that we
got
have
jet
that
black hair,
done,
but I know she only speaks every once in a while.
what I'm going to do
But you know that she's there,
is
and I know
unsolo
it. Takes a minute to
and then make
understand
sure
it, but
that
you
we
know
are
it
getting
when it's there. But I know that she sleeps
a
on the way to the
nice
cab.
balance between everything.
'Cause she's a pirate radio queen. So tell your mother what it means to be a silent radio sing and be a pirate radio reject. I know she's the queen of the radio dial. And she's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while. But you know that she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to.
And that is starting to sound like a song. One more thing that I want to do before we'll wrap for the day is I'm going to bring in another compressor on this this bus that I have that all of the tracks are ultimately being routed to. This is what's known as master bus compression, and or also known as glue compression, because what it does is it really sort of it's very subtle. You're only doing like about a decibel compression, but that squeezing helps the song feel really cohesive and like a single unit, because it's getting this little bit of compression that's reacting to one thing. In order to do this, you set a really gentle ratio. So I'm using 1.5 to 1, and then I'm going to adjust the threshold so that we're barely getting any compression out of it.
I know she's the queen of the radio dial. And she's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while. But you know that she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand it, but you know it when it's there. And I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab, 'cause she's a pirate radio queen.
So I adjusted the threshold to get 1 decibel compression, and then I adjusted the attack, made it a little faster so that it really catches the drums, in particular the snare. Now that I have this on, I'm going to go and I'm going to do some final adjustments to the levels.
I know she's the queen of the radio dial. And she's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while. But you know that she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand it, but you know it when it's there. And I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab, 'cause she's a pirate
So
radio
with glue
queen.
compression,
So tell your mother what it means
and we are losing some levels, so
to
I'm
be
going to go
a
and add some
silent
make it
radio sing and be a pirate radio reject. I know she's a queen.
I'll start from the beginning.
I know she's the queen of the radio dial. And She's got jet black hair, but I know she only speaks every once in a while.
So you hear the
But you
cars get
know
brought
that
up.
she's there, and I know it. Takes a minute to understand it, but you know it when it's there. And I know that she sleeps on the way to the cab.
This one kind of moves to the drums a little bit more, which is ultimately what I want in a rock song like this. The drums kind of propel everything along. So having everything react to the drums and having the elements of the drums really pop out, while allowing for a little bit of space between the hits, really provides that bloom effect from which this compressor gets its name.
But it's so laissez-faire, and I know
Makes it feel like
takes
a
a minute to
cohesive finish.
understand it, but you know it when it's there. And I know she sleeps on the way to the cab, man. She's a pilot, radio queen. She tell your mother what it means to be a silent radio scene. Be a pilot, radio reject.
And there we go. Any questions? Anyway, to recap before we wrap for the day, we really did a deep dive into the individual song elements to explore how different mics pick up different types of sounds and how we can really blend everything together. This is sort of, this is like big studio mixing, but I personally think this is a fun way to start just because we get to really play around with sound and listen to how things are different and really see that there is no set like numbers for like guitar EQ. It all depends on the performance and the instrument and the microphones that were used. If you're doing, say, a like an amp sim, if you're plugging directly into your interface, what you can do is, I'll just do it here. If I were doing an amp sim on the bass DI, I would actually create a duplicate track and then load amp sims on both of them. I'll do my 11 Mark II. Making sure that, not the tweed bass, where is it? That I'm using the same amp and the same cab, but I'd come down here to the mic type and I'd choose two different microphones. So we're going to use the Dynamic 421 and the Condenser 414, and real quick, just having those two together, if we listen back, we can hear that that one sounds different from that one. And by blending them together, we get a fuller and richer sound than we'd have simply using one of them. So that's the way that you can use what we were focusing on today in home recording. As far as everything else goes, I can't think of much else to say. So any final questions? And if not, then we'll wrap. Anyway, it has been really fun going through this mix, talking about what I'm doing. And I look forward to seeing you next week, where we'll do another mix for another song and do a completely different approach to mixing. Because what you'll discover as you get more and more into it is that there are so many ways to really approach a mix and to really get the process to be your own. So hopefully at the end of the course, you will have discovered what works for you and can go forward with your mixing in a way that really is complementary to your process. And you're welcome. It's been fun. I will see you next Sunday. You're welcome. Talk to you soon.